Okay, welcome to Anatomy Physio 1, Chapter 1. So we're going to dive right into this material. Chapter 1, of course, is an intro chapter. And so we're going to do a lot of definitions here, and then obviously throughout the class we will progress into more complex material. But let's go ahead and get started. So anatomy. Anatomy is the study of the structure of body parts and their relationship with one another. And that's incredibly important because if you're going into nursing or something in the medical field, you have to know every single body system, right? So that's that. So we have to know the structures and how they correlate and connect to one another. Now, physiology is a little more complex. It's more of the functions. It's the study of how these body parts work together, how they sustain life, and how they operate. Okay, so anatomy is the structure, physiology is the function. And you'll see that quite a bit. Structure, function, structure, function. There are subtopics in anatomy. We have gross anatomy. Okay, this is in reference to something that's large. Now, we use the term macroscopic. Now, what does macro mean? Okay, macro always just means large. So gross anatomy is on a large scale. Visible structures like your heart, lungs, kidneys, your eyes, your brain, things like that. Big structures. Okay, and then we have microscopic anatomy. Well, that's kind of straightforward, right? Micro means small, and microscopic anatomy is going to be in reference to things that are too small to be seen by the naked eye. Things that are too small are your cells, for example. Your cells and your tissue. And what we're going to do in this class later on is we're going to have an entire section on histology. Tissue and histology is quite significant. It's so important for us to understand the fundamental groundwork of the human body. So I can't teach you the cardiovascular system and the nervous system or even the skeletal system without first teaching you the cellular structures, and then we'll move to the next level, which is the tissue structure. So just keep that in mind. All of this is the groundwork and the frame for understanding gross anatomy. We have to understand microscopic anatomy, then we move to gross anatomy. All right, either way, you want to know that these are subdivisions, and then we have developmental anatomy, and of course this is something where we would study the structural changes that go on throughout your life. For example, embryology is one. Okay, so first things first, to understand any organization in regards to something like the human body, or any animal for that matter, but focusing on the human body, we have to go all the way down to the fundamental building blocks. Okay, so we're going to learn the chemical level. I'm going to teach you guys at the atomic, molecular, and organelle level. Then we'll move to the cellular level. Then we'll move to a tissue level. So really quick, a cell. A single cell is the fundamental unit of life, meaning that we can have life at a unicellular level. Okay, we need cells to build up our tissue. So basically what tissue is it's very simple. It's just a group of cells that have the same function. Okay? Now, those tissues that we have, tissues that share the same function, will make up our organs. And sometimes we'll have more than one type of tissue making up one organ. Okay, so the organ level is going to be, your kidneys, your heart, your brain, etc. Okay, now our organs that have the same function are going to be a system, an organ system. For example, the heart is an organ, right? Now that would be on the organ level. I'm gonna just type heart. Now with this lecture, definitely, anytime I type something or draw it, I definitely write it as well, take notes. Okay, and then so if we're using the heart as an example, then what about the rest of it? What about the organ system level? Okay, so technically, an organ system is a group of organs that work together and they have the same function. Okay, so that would be if we're referencing the heart, then it's going to be the cardiovascular system, and it contains the heart and your blood and all of your blood vessels. Okay. We can also do the same thing with the digestive system or your respiratory system. Okay, so there's a group of organs in each system that work together to operate that system, and then all of those organ systems together, all the organ systems combine to make an entire organism, which would be, in this case, the human body. So we are the organism in this case. Okay, so let's kind of recap what that means. All right, so from smallest to largest, okay, you want to know the levels of structure from small to large. The smallest unit, okay, are atoms. This is the chemical level. Atoms are, we have 92 elements. And we'll learn more about this in the next chapter, but the fact is that we do have these 92 elements and they come together to produce molecules. Molecules, see this atom here, okay? And this one in red and this one in gray. Okay, this is representing a carbon. These are representing oxygens. These are representing hydrogens. Okay, they're individual, and that's fine. They can stay that way. That's not a problem. I'll go ahead and put a carbon. Okay, there's a C right there for carbon. Okay, that red one is representing oxygen. Put an O for oxygen. These little blue guys right here, these are hydrogens. Okay, so these are all separate and individual. Those are our atoms. Okay, they come together to make molecules. A molecule is a group of atoms. Sometimes we have small molecules, sometimes we have big ones. So can anyone guess what these two are? Or I'm sorry, this one is. This particular molecule. Okay, so if it has a gray circle in the middle, that's carbon, and it has two red ones, well, that is carbon dioxide, CO2. These are just examples of molecules, okay? So, so our atoms come together to make molecules. This one down here, this little guy down here, there's an oxygen and two hydrogens. What could that possibly be? An oxygen, two hydrogens. That is H2O. All right, so we have atoms that come together to make molecules. Okay, these are the building blocks. These molecules make macromolecules, which make up our organelles. Okay, this is an organelle. We have these inside of our cells. This is just one example. Okay, our organelles join to make cells. This is the cellular level. Okay, so our cells are made up of molecules and atoms and organelles. Okay, so all of them together make up our cells. Now, this is the functional unit of life. The cell is the functional unit of life. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Functional. Okay, that's not a very big box, huh? Stretch it out. There we go. This is the functional unit of life. What does that even mean? Okay, that means that this is the smallest unit of life, meaning anything smaller, everything from this point backwards is not technically alive and cannot be. All right, so cells that have the same function come together and make tissue. So in this example, we have a smooth muscle cell. We have smooth muscle cells all over the place in our body, right? Now in this particular example, that smooth muscle cell, see how it's tapered? We have a group of them that make up the smooth muscle tissue. So tissues and tissue in general is just simply cells that have the same function. Okay, that smooth muscle tissue, okay, smooth muscle tissue or tissue that has the same function come together to form our organs. So what we're looking at here in this picture, the organ example that they've utilized is a blood vessel, which is technically an organ. And your blood vessels are made up of different types of tissue. Okay, in this particular situation, we are looking at smooth muscle. Okay, so notice that the smooth muscle is right there. It's in the middle. Notice also what's around it. On the outside, there's connective tissue, and on the inside, there's a line of tissue called epithelial tissue. All right, but that's really, beside the point. Okay, so yeah, our organs that have the same function in common make up our organ system, make up our organ systems in general. Now, they've used the cardiovascular example that I just previously used. So what they're showing us is there's the heart, there's the blood vessels, and don't forget the blood inside all work together to operate your cardiovascular system. Okay, so all organ systems to come together and they make up an entire organism. So this is clearly a person, an athletic person, and a healthy person. And the reason why they're showing you an athlete is to show you that this person is completely healthy, right? And all of those organ systems that we have here, all of the organ systems, the cardiovascular, the respiratory, the integumentary system, the digestive, and so on, all 11 systems make up the organism. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. This is just structural, the levels of structural organization, okay? So atoms make up molecules, molecules make up organelles, organelles make up cells, cells that have the same function make up tissue, tissue that has the same function makes up our organs, organs that share the same function make up your organ systems. All of your organ systems make up you or make up the organism, which is the human body. All right. Next topic. Now, in science, generally we like to classify everything, right? And so, of course, scientists have definitely laid down some guidelines to tell us, what is required for something to be considered alive. What is the requirement for an organism to be considered alive? What does it have to have? Okay, so it has to have these necessary life functions, okay? It has to be able to maintain boundaries. It has to be able to move, respond, digest, metabolize, excrete, reproduce, and grow. Okay, that's easy enough. Let's go ahead and take a look at each one. What What do we mean maintain boundaries? All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, every single cell has something called a plasma membrane, and it creates this barrier between the internal environment of the cell and the external environment of the cell, allowing the internal environment to have a completely different biochemical makeup than does the outside of the cell. Okay, we also have our skin, for example. That's a perfect example. Your skin protects your internal body from the external environment. All the pollutants out there, from bacteria, from fungi. If you didn't have your skin, then you would look like this guy. You'd be exposed, and that is scary. All right, and then of course we have something called membrane-bound organelles that we will discuss in our cellular chapter. Okay, so that's what we mean by maintaining these boundaries, especially on a cellular level, but also on an organismal level. Okay, now an organism has to be able to move. A living organism has to be able to move. And we have a very sophisticated muscular system and skeletal system that helps with our movement. And then, of course, don't forget our cardiovascular system allows for blood to be pumped and transported throughout your entire body. All right, that's a big job, and we'll talk more about that job when we get to cardiovascular. But the fact is that it's still movement, the movement of blood, the delivery of oxygen to every single cell in your body. And then we see the same thing with digestion, urination. These are different muscles that are involved in operating the body, but the fact is there's movement on a cellular level, and there's movement on a full organismal level. All right, so on a cellular level, this is where we see a lot of contraction, and that's more on a cellular level. We need smooth muscle to contract to pump that blood and to move it around your entire system. And we definitely need our cardiac muscle cells to contract as well. Okay, so responsiveness. Responsiveness is pretty straightforward. It's the ability to respond to your external environment and internal environment. For example, external, we have our sensory organs, our eyes, our ears, we have our sense of smell. We also have nerves inside of our integumentary system to prevent injury. So we have the ability to sense, detect, and protect ourselves. Okay, so you have the ability, if you put your hand over a flame or you get near something hot, you're going to immediately have a reflex and pull your hand away. That is responsiveness. Now, inside of the body, things that you don't actually have control over because they're autonomic responses, like controlling your breathing rate. Okay, your nervous system has control over that. And that's why we have this little guy over here with all his neurons firing off, because your nervous system is going to control, your cardiovascular system, your breathing rate, and things like that. Okay, but the fact is the body is able to do those things because it's because we're a living organism. Okay, so these are necessary for life. Responsiveness, digestion, that's pretty straightforward. You eat your food, and the point of getting all those nutrients is the point of ingesting your food and things like that is to eventually break that down and utilize the resources, the nutrients that your system is, that the digestive system is breaking down. All right, I'll give you a quick example. Okay, not only does it need to be broken down, it needs to be absorbed. So let's say you eat a sandwich, okay? What does a sandwich have? It has bread. Let's say it has cheese. And it has meat, okay? your digestive system needs to break that bread down into carbs. And those carbs need to be broken down into glucose. Okay, these are simple. Glucose is a simple molecule that you absolutely need for life. It is essential for life. Okay, so the digestive system has a pretty big job. So its job is to take this sandwich and take it from bread and break it down into glucose, and then you need to be able to absorb it, which is pretty straightforward. The body does that. That cheese needs to be broken down into something called lipids, and those lipids need to be broken down into something called fatty acids, plus a molecule called glycerol. All right, I'm giving you a little bit of extra information here, but I do want to point this stuff out because you're going to see it again. Now, meat, we know we get protein from that, and eventually those proteins need to be broken down into amino acids. So your body has this incredible ability to take food, break it down into these simple molecules that we need for survival, like glucose, fatty acids plus glycerol, and amino acids, and then absorb it into your blood. Okay, big job. Okay, metabolism. Now, metabolism is straightforward. Metabolism is an accumulation or the sum of all of the chemical reactions that occur in the body. So we have reactions that are catabolic or catabolism. Okay, catabolic reactions break down molecules. And you have anabolic reactions or anabolism, and this is when the system or cells are synthesizing, aka building molecules. Okay, and the full sum of all of it is your metabolism. Okay, excretion, straightforward. We have to be able to remove metabolic and digestive wastes. So things like urea, we excrete through our urinary system. Carbon dioxide, we get out of our system via our respiratory system. Okay, so we need that. That's a waste product, and we need it out, right? And then, of course, we have our feces, which is all waste products that are removed from unabsorbed foods. All right, reproduction. Another necessary life function is being able to reproduce. Okay, and we're talking about cellular reproduction. You have approximately 30 trillion cells that make up all of your tissue, that make up all of your organs, that make up all of your organ systems. Now, those cells have to be able to grow and renew themselves, and they do. Okay, and another type of reproduction is sexual reproduction, which is producing offspring. But really, the fact is this: reproduction is passing DNA from parent to offspring. Okay, and this can be literally from parent to a baby, or it can happen on a cellular level. There are parent cells and daughter cells that we'll see in the cellular chapter. Okay, and then of course growth and growth. You do not pop into existence as is, right? You grow. You grow over the course of your life. You go from being a single-celled zygote to being, in utero, to being a newborn, to a toddler, to a teen, to a full-blown adult made of approximately 30 trillion or so cells. We'll say approximately 30 trillion cells. Alrighty. Now, the systems of the human body, we have 11 organ systems that work in tandem to maintain your physical health, to make sure that you are functional, that you are alive, and that you are healthy. All right, we're going to learn these systems in Anatomy Physio 1 and Anatomy Physio 2. But just as an introductory, I'm going to go through I'm going to briefly introduce each system. I'll actually come back to this part. All right, let's go ahead and start. Now, of course, you want to know each system and details about it. The integumentary system. The integumentary system is the largest system because it includes your skin. And it's the largest, or your skin is the largest organ of the entire body. Okay. Now, not only is it skin, it includes your hair and it includes your nails. Okay. And the integumentary system actually has a huge job. Not only does it protect all of the tissue underneath from injury, it acts as your first line of defense because it creates a physical barrier. And we also have some immune cells inside of the integumentary system that is your first line of defense against bacteria. Okay. Now, it also is capable of synthesizing vitamin D. This happens in your skin. Okay. It houses receptors, important receptors. So in your integumentary system, you have these pain receptors, you have pressure receptors, you have receptors that are connected to hair follicles, you have your sweat glands, you have oil glands. All of this is part of the integumentary system. Okay, next, the skeletal system. All right, so we have bones, of course, but what do? Okay, they protect your internal organs. For example, your rib cage and sternum is protecting your heart and lungs, right? Okay, and it also gives you your full framework. So this is, of course, where muscles can attach so you can move around, and then bones also make our blood cells, and they store minerals like calcium and phosphate. Okay, next system is our muscular system. Our muscular system allows us to move around, of course. It gives us our ability to make facial expressions, maintain posture. These muscles make heat, and they allow us to manipulate the environment around us. For example, drive a car or pick up a cup or run, walk. Of course, everything is in the hands of the muscles, including breathing, including your, including the heartbeat. But that's a different muscle. Alrighty, now your nervous system. Your nervous system is the boss. Your nervous system, your brain, spinal cord, and nerves, they control every other system in the body. It's the boss. Okay? Next, the endocrine system. So notice the endocrine system is not this completely connected thing, right? Look at the heart, the cardiovascular. Everything's connected. The endocrine system is one of the systems that's not connected because what it is a bunch of glands, and they're incredibly significant glands. We need our endocrine system to be in good shape. We have our pineal gland in the brain. We have our pituitary in the brain. We have our thyroid gland right there in your neck. You have your thymus gland. Okay. You have your thymus gland in the chest. You have the adrenal glands that sit right on top of your kidneys, one on top of each kidney, and then you have your pancreas. Your pancreas has a huge job. And then women have their ovaries and men have the testes. All of these, even though they're disconnected physically, they can communicate with each other rapidly because they send signals. They send signals like they send signals that are called hormones. Hormones that regulate everything: growth, reproduction, metabolism. The endocrine system has quite a significant job, and everything needs to be balanced. Okay, our cardiovascular system, which we've talked about before, its job is to transport blood and specifically transport oxygen and deliver oxygen to every single cell in your body. Okay, and at the same time, remove carbon dioxide from your cells, remove waste products. So ultimately, let's be very clear here. The job of the cardiovascular system is to deliver oxygen and nutrients. Let me get okay, I'm just going to put oxygen right here, O2, and nutrients. Okay, and it has to deliver them to every single cell in your body. So I'm just going to draw one cell. Okay, this is a non-specific cell. Every single cell has to have oxygen and nutrients delivered to it. That's a big job. And at the same time, it has to be able to take away CO2 and other waste products. Okay, you're going to have to bear with me with these videos because of the teaching online situation. Okay, so cardiovascular, the job of the cardiovascular system. This is representing the blood. Okay, these guys, the entire system is designed to specifically deliver oxygen and nutrients to every single cell that you have. Meanwhile, taking away CO2 and waste products to get rid of them. Alrighty, it's a big job, and okay, let's go ahead and actually move on. I was going to say one more thing, but I'll say it when I get there. All right, our lymphatic system. So you have a lymphatic and immune system. The immune system is not completely represented here, but ultimately our lymphatic system, it works with our cardiovascular system to pull extra fluids or supply fluids to the vascular tissue as needed. And then, of course, it houses our white blood cells, which are our lymphocytes. Okay, these guys attack and fight foreign substances. So there's a big job in that situation. All right, in that system. They all actually have a big job. All right, so the respiratory system, the primary job of the respiratory system is to do the following. Okay, the job of the respiratory system is we need CO2 out. We want it out of the body, right? We exhale CO2. And what do we want to exchange it for? We exchange it for oxygen. And that is exactly what the respiratory system does. It exchanges gases. It swaps out CO2, we want that out, for oxygen, we want that in. Okay, our digestive system we've discussed. Its job is to break down food into these molecules and macromolecules, and then also absorb those molecules that we are getting from our diet and then of course remove and eliminate the waste products and leftover material that we don't need in the form of feces. Okay, our urinary system actually has quite a big job. It is responsible for removing nitrogenous waste. Okay, it regulates your water. Make sure you have enough water, make sure you have enough electrolytes. It controls your blood, meaning, in other words, it controls the acidity of your blood. Your blood, human blood, should never have a pH that leaves this range. It should be 7.35 to 7.45. Okay, we cannot deviate from that ever. Okay, if we do, then that is incredibly dangerous, and you'd be hospitalized. Now, who is responsible for maintaining your blood pH? The urinary system. Huge job. Okay, not to mention the fact that this system also makes our urine and excretes all of these waste products and so on. Okay, and then we have our reproductive system. There's the male reproductive system. The overall function of that system is to produce offspring. The female reproductive system, same thing. Okay, not only offspring, right? Both systems are designed for reproduction, but then of course we need those systems to make our hormones, to make them effectively, so that we don't end up with a hormone imbalance. So they have quite the job. All right, so those are the 11 systems. Now, we also have survival needs, and these are not anything elusive that you've never seen before or that should be very shocking. You need nutrients, oxygen, water. You need your body temperature to be perfect, and you need a good atmospheric temperature around you. All right, let's start with nutrients. Now, our system, the human body, we operate off of our building blocks. Our building blocks are carbohydrates, proteins, fats, okay, and nucleic acids. We also need vitamins and minerals, okay? So your primary source of energy, all the energy in your body. Right now, your body is utilizing energy just to be alive, just to sit here and listen to this video and watch this video is taking up quite a bit of energy. You get this energy from your diet, which comes from carbohydrates. Carbohydrates such as glucose. For example, you burn 128 grams of glucose in the brain alone every single day without even knowing it. Okay, we need proteins. We need proteins for building. We need proteins to be broken down into amino acids so we can build anything we want. Our body needs to be able to build any protein it wants, and it gets the building blocks from your diet. Okay, fats, we need fats for, we store energy that way, and we also use it to build, we use it for energy, okay, just like the glucose, and we also use it to cushion areas that need to be protected. We use it for insulation, cushioning areas that are delicate. So you have fat cells for that. And then of course we have minerals and vitamins that have various jobs, and usually they're kind of an assistant in getting a biochemical process orchestrated or completed, but they are essential for life. Okay, oxygen, that's very straightforward. You cannot survive without oxygen longer than a few minutes. Okay, and that's that. Water, primarily your body is made of water. Okay, all life comes from water, and we need to maintain that water balance at all times on a cellular level and on an organismal level. Okay, your body temperature should be 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, if it deviates from that, if it drops too low, that's hypothermia. If it goes too high, that's a fever, right? And we all know that if you end up with a fever, and especially if it gets too high at some point, this is incredibly dangerous. All right, now atmospheric pressure. So what this means is to have adequate breathing, we can't be too high and we can't be too low. So if you go really, 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 really high up a mountain top, for example, I mean, people that climb Mount Everest sometimes can't make it all the way up because the atmospheric pressure up there is they can't is inadequate for breathing, and they can't handle it. They'll faint. So that's what they mean. We need the perfect atmospheric temperature. We can't be too high up. We also can't be too far under below sea level. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is homeostasis. Now, a lot of people get this concept, confused because they are introduced to it in a confusing manner. Now, it doesn't have to be confusing. Homeostasis simply means balance. That's why we have these scales. See how these scales, okay, are balanced, okay, because homeostasis, that's what it means. It means balance. Balance of what? Okay, so inside of your body, your body, all of your organs and your organ systems have to be perfect all the time, meaning you can't be too hot, you can't be too cold, you can't have, your blood pH can't be off. I'll actually make a little list. Let's make a list, okay. Homeostasis is going to control your blood pressure. You can't be too high or too low. Your body temperature, right? Your O2 levels. I mean, the list goes on and on. Your glucose levels. Every single thing in your system is regulated and it's maintained in this perfect balance called homeostasis. Okay, if something deviates or changes, let's say you eat something like that increases your blood glucose, your body cannot allow that to happen. So it's going to respond, and its goal is to get back to this perfect balance of homeostasis. So, in other words, homeostasis is this perfect, balanced, stable internal conditions that you have in your body. Without your, you don't have to think about it because your body already maintains homeostasis all day, every day. All right. Homeostasis is the maintenance and stability of your body, keeping it perfectly balanced, and I mean every single aspect of it. Okay, so this is a great example to use in regards to homeostasis. So see how it says negative feedback loop? All right, now this explains how your body controls homeostasis and maintains that perfect balance of homeostasis. Now see this where it says no deviation, and see how this line is straight across right here? That is our homeostasis. See, it says glucose norm, no deviation, glucose norm. Everything's perfectly perfect there. Okay, because this is the body at homeostasis. Homeostasis, remember, means balance. In other words, no deviation. Perfect. Okay. So this is how your body normally is, right? As long as you're not diabetic. Okay, now if you eat something, your glucose, your blood glucose is going to increase. Now, if your blood glucose increases, we have an entire series of events that's going to respond because we have something called a negative feedback loop, and this is the negative feedback loop right here. The first step in the negative feedback loop is this change. Glucose increases. Okay, it's increased. What now? Well, there has to be a response. That's step 2. So we have these receptors, pancreatic receptors. Their job is to detect this. They immediately detect that glucose has increased in the blood, and they're going to respond. Okay, and they're going to release insulin. And that insulin will act on the liver, and the liver will pull glucose out of your blood so it's not floating around. It's going to store it away in the form of something called glycogen. Glycogen is just, okay, it's glucose storage. Okay, therefore, what's happened here is that the body has reacted, pulled glucose out of the blood, stored it as glycogen, and now the blood glucose is back to normal. All of this happens so fast and so quickly and without any of your knowledge, really. It just happens. And this whole response is called a negative feedback loop. All right, so homeostasis. Homeostasis, should definitely be taking notes, is maintained by negative feedback loops. Okay, this is just one negative feedback loop. There's a negative feedback loop for every single deviation. All right, and if we look, we actually have a second negative feedback loop right here. Okay, so let me just clarify this again. Up here, this whole thing I just went through with you guys is a negative feedback loop. Now we have an entire negative feedback loop down here that is relative to what we've been discussing. So let's say that you haven't eaten in a while and your blood glucose starts to drop. That is it's going to elicit a response. In fact, your pancreatic receptors will respond to that, and they will instruct the liver through a signal called glucagon to release glucose that we have stored away from. You store glucose your entire life. We have glucose stored away in the liver. We have it in our muscle cells in the form of glycogen. So all that the body has to do now is the liver just has to release glucose from glycogen into the blood, returning it back to normal. That's another negative feedback loop specifically designed to maintain blood glucose homeostasis. Now, homeostatic control has these steps, right? The stimulus, the receptor detects a change. Then there's an input of information, meaning that there's going to be a control center, and it's usually the brain that tells everybody what to do. And the brain will tell the body, okay, go ahead and release this chemical, or go ahead and store away, take that glucose and put it away in the liver, and so on and so forth. And it communicates through things like insulin and glucagon. So, So yes, if we look at it this way, this is a 5-stage process. A stimulus, a receptor, an input, an output, and then a response. And the goal is to always just bring us right back into homeostasis, to balance. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the blood glucose thing that we just looked at, or if we're talking about body temperature. It doesn't matter. The fact is that every system that you have, your whole internal body is controlled and it's balanced. And that balance is homeostasis. Any deviation is going to elicit a negative feedback response, a negative feedback loop. This whole thing that we're looking at here is a negative feedback loop. This is an example of a negative feedback loop. And it's generic. Next section of this chapter, we're going to talk about anatomical terms and terminology. And this is important because these types of terms are used all the time in medicine, in the hospitals. These are the terms that, as a nurse, PA, any healthcare industry you're going into, you do have to know this terminology. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. These are clearly definitions, and I don't need to read them to you. I'm just going to show you what they are. But we do have anatomical positions that we're going to learn, and directional positions that, directional terms, really, that we're going to learn. So let's go ahead and start with the first one, and I'm going to zoom in on the first one. Okay. The first one. Okay, that's not working very well. All right, first term. Let's circle this one. Superior. Okay, think of the word superior. Your superior at work means that someone, your boss, someone that's above you. And here, the term superior is similar in the sense that it means towards above, towards the head or upper region. So superior means above, upper body, the top, the cranium. See how this arrow is showing you upwards? Because that is what superior means. Easy, no big deal, right? Okay, next term, inferior. Inferior is the exact opposite. Okay, inferior means away from the head or towards the lower part of the body or below. Like to be inferior in a position, it's a good example. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's a good example. Inferior means below. That's it. The end. Easy peasy. There's no reason to make it more complicated than that. All right, next term, ventral. Okay, if you look at our guy right here, ventral, in the example, you see the arrow moving forward because that's exactly what it means. It's in reference to body parts that are at the front of your body. The ventral side is the front side. Okay, the opposite is posterior. So anterior or ventral means the front. Posterior or dorsal means the back. And that's why we have this going this way. And think of this. The dorsal fin on a shark is on its back. So dorsal, posterior, your posterior is back. Anterior and ventral is the front of the body. Very good. Nothing too complicated there. Let's go ahead and move on. All right, now these are directional terms. And one of the first ones I want to go over, and the book goes over as well, is medial. Medial, when you hear this term, think middle, midline. So everybody has a midline in their body, the middle, okay? And we use this as a reference point. to describe various things. For example, we can say something like the heart is medial to the arm. We're going to make a medial incision in the left leg, and so on. So you have to know these terms. And medial means middle, easy. Okay, so everything kind of surrounds that. Everything kind of surrounds that the midline. Okay, and so when we talk about the next terms like lateral, lateral is going to be away from the midline, to the side of the midline. Lateral is away from the midline. So that's why you see these two arrows going away from the midline. Okay, intermediate is between lateral and the midline. Intermediate, it's in the middle of the midline and the lateral position, intermediate. Okay, now proximal. All right, this is pretty significant. You probably have seen this term before, but proximal means close, nearby, close to the origin. Okay, distal, think distant. It means far, farther away from the point of origin. Superficial, okay, superficial means that it's close to the surface of the body. Deep or internal, that's clear. That means it's deeper or more internal and away from the superficial end of the body. Okay, now these are very clear-cut terms. You just want to know them. Now, actually, before I move on, I want to point something out. Do you see the position of our example? Okay, look at this guy. Hang on one second. See the way he's standing? Okay, palms facing out. Okay, now I want to go back to one important thing. The way that sketch is diagrammed this is referenced as the standard anatomical position. Okay, so if you stand up right now on your feet, okay, and you face forward and you keep your body completely erect. Now I'm actually doing this right now. Stand on your feet, okay, and make your back straight, feet slightly apart, and you're going to take your hands and take your palms and have them facing forward with your thumbs pointing away from the body. Now, this anatomical position is a must know, because when we start learning the bones and different areas of the body, it's always going to be based on the standard anatomical position. All right, so keep that in mind. This is the standard anatomical position. We are obviously looking at him from behind because his thumbs are sticking out. Very good. All right, let's move on. Now, our human body is divided into two major divisions, the axial and the appendicular division. Axial, okay, now I want you to think about a graph. On our graph, in math, we have graphs, right? Okay, I'm going to just draw like a quick, very generic graph here. Okay, now when we talk about in reference to a graph, okay, this is called what? Called the y-axis, right? And so down here, this one is called what? The x-axis. Okay, so when we're referencing the axial position or division of the body, we are talking about what is right in the center, which is the head, the neck, and trunk. Okay, appendicular, think of the word appendicular or appendages. These are the legs and arms. All right, so we divide the body up into these terms so that we can reference them quickly. All right, So appendicular are your limbs, your arms and legs, and everything inside. And the axial is going to be the head, neck, and your trunk, which is your upper body frame. Okay, now there is quite a bit of terminology that we need to know in anatomy physio, and this will help you along the way in regards to knowing bones, muscles, muscle location, artery location, things like that, because these terms are used repeatedly. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. So let's start with this guy over here. Let's start with the trunk, or I'm sorry, the head, neck, and trunk. Okay, so the head. When we reference the entire head, this term is referred to as the cephalic. Okay, forehead, frontal. Around the eye is going to be an orbital. Nasal is nose. Buccal is cheek. Oral is mouth. Mental is chin. Okay, now we're talking about the neck. We're talking about the cervical. Think of the cervical spine, right? Not too difficult. This is clearly the trunk. Okay, so what kind of terms do we have here? In the center, that's your sternal area because the sternum is there. Okay, let me actually erase this little tiny part. Okay, kind of in the armpit area is called the axillary. And because there's mammary glands in the pectoral region, that's called mammary. Okay, abdominal. And one of our terms here is umbilical for obvious reasons. That's where the umbilical cord was. And then this is the pelvic region. So that's that. Pretty straightforward. Of course, we have our pelvic and then pubic region. Okay, now what about if that's the axial terminology? Let's talk about appendicular. Okay. Now notice this is the anterior/ventral view. I'm going to erase some of this here and just get it out of the way because it's a little messy. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the appendicular upper region. So that's going to be the arms, clearly the upper limb. Okay, upper limb. So there's quite a few terms here. And they're straightforward. Acromial is right there in the shoulder joint, shoulder area. And as we get into the anatomy and joints, you're going to see why, but you want to remember that term. Brachial. Brachial means arm, your upper arm. Okay, at this joint, that's the antecubital olecranial. Okay, in your forearm, antebrachial, forearm. Okay, your wrists, referred to as the carpal, and just think of carpal tunnel syndrome, and that will be an easy way to remember that. All right, your hand is referred to as the manus, like monomanus, okay? And then, of course, we have a various sets of bones. We have our metacarpals, the palmar bones, the pollex, the digital area. All right, let's look at the lower limbs. Okay, the hip is always referred to as the coxal. The femoral is your thigh because of the femoral bone. Your knee is the patellar area. Leg, lower leg, crural. Okay, croup roll is the leg, and the calf is shoe roll. Okay, fibular, okay, because of the fibular bone. All right, foot, pedal. Think of pedaling a bike. Your ankle, tarsal, and the calcaneal because of the calcaneus bone. Tarsal, metatarsal, digital, plantar, hallux. Okay. All right, a lot of this is memorization, and a lot of anatomy is memorization. So let's go ahead and just review or look at this side. This is the posterior dorsal view. Remember, dorsal means back. See if there's a couple of things here that we didn't see in the other image or that haven't been covered. And basically what it is we didn't cover the otic, which is in reference to the ear. Okay, the occipital is the back of the head. Okay, and then you have your cervical spine or cervical region because of the cervical spine. Okay, in the back, on our dorsal side, we have our scapular region, the vertebral, the lumbar, the sacral region, the gluteal region. What else are we missing here? Okay, I think we've mostly, yeah, that's everything. All right, so all of these terms are going to be very helpful as we go through this class, part 1 and 2. So you want to know them inside and out. Okay, we're going to watch a quick video on the orientation and directional terms, and then we're going to move into the
screencast. I'm going to review the directional. In this screencast, I'm going to review the directional terms that you'll need to know throughout the whole semester. The first two I'm going to talk about are going to be medial and lateral. Remember, the medial part is the part that is closest to the midline, and this is the midline. The lateral part is the part that's farthest from the midline. So for example, your nose is blank to your ear. Your nose would be medial to your ear because the nose is closer to the midline, just as the ear would be lateral to the nose because it's farther from the midline than the nose is. Another example I shared with you is in the knee. Remember, there's a medial ligament and a lateral ligament. The medial ligament is going to be closer to the midline. The lateral ligament is going to be farther from the midline. The next two we're going to look at is superior and inferior. The superior part is the part that's closer to the head. The inferior part is going to be farther from the head. And remember, we use superior and inferior when we're talking about the head and torso. So the nose is going to be blank to the belly button. The nose is going to be the superior part because it's closer to the head. The belly button is going to be inferior to the nose because it's farther from the head. Also remember, if I did the nose in the mouth, the nose would be superior to the mouth because it's higher up. Now remember, again, those are the terms we use when we're talking about the head and the torso. When we're talking about the appendages, the arms and the legs, we use the terms proximal and distal. The proximal part is the part that is closest to the attachment of that appendage. So the shoulder for the arm, the hip for the leg. So your elbow would be blank to your wrist. Your elbow would be proximal because the elbow is closer to the attachment. The wrist would be distal because it's farther than the elbow from the attachment. Down at your legs, if we looked at your ankle and your knee, compared to your knee, your ankle is distal. It's farther from the attachment point than the knee, which is proximal. So make sure you understand, you use superior and inferior on the head and torso. If you're given two parts that are on the head and torso, you use superior and inferior, and you use proximal and distal if you're given two parts on the arms or the legs. The next set of terms we're going to look at are anterior and posterior. The anterior part is the part that is closer to the front, and the posterior part is the part that is closer to the back. I gave you an example in the knee. There's an anterior cruciate ligament, and there's a posterior cruciate ligament. The anterior cruciate is towards the front, posterior towards the back. Your nose is blank to your spinal cord. Your nose would be anterior, your spinal cord would be posterior. So again, anterior and posterior, front and back. The next set of terms is superficial and deep. Superficial is going to be closer to the surface. Deep is going to be deeper than the superficial part. So an example is, it goes your skin, your fat, and your muscle. So what would your skin be compared to muscle? The skin would be superficial to your muscle. The muscle would be deep to the skin. You'll see us use those terms a lot, superficial and deep, when we get to the muscles. If one muscle's on top of the other one, the one on top is considered superficial, and the one on the bottom is considered deep. The last set of terms are what's called contralateral and ipsilateral. Ipsilateral, remember, has two eyes, which means the two parts are on the same side. So if I made the comment, the right leg, and the right arm are blank, you would say they are ipsilateral. They are on the same side. If I said the left arm and the right leg are blank, your answer would be they are contralateral. They are on opposite sides. So when you see me, or in other situations, use two right sides or a right and a left, the terms you should be using are ipsilateral if they're on the same side, and contralateral if they are on opposite sides. So again, this is just a review of your basic terms in terms of directional terms. You need to make sure you understand this because it will be on every one of your tests. As we go through the different systems, we will use the terms. One other thing I want to remind you of is that you need to make sure you know that you're in the anatomical position. Okay? Anatomical position with the front of the hands facing anterior, facing towards the front. Now this will come into play not as much with proximal and distal, but with medial and lateral. When you look at it in the anatomical position, you'll see here the pinkies are medial and the thumbs are lateral. So you have to remember you're in the anatomical position when you're doing or using this terminology. And again, that only really affects the arms, and it only really affects when you're using medial and lateral. Proximal and distal won't make any difference. So I hope this helps. Go back and review it again, because again, you're going to see several questions on the first test and every test after that within lab. So it's something you need to make sure that you understand. If you have any other questions, just feel free to ask or talk to your friends in the lab and see if they can help you.
The next thing we're going to talk about is body planes and sections. So basically, we're going to just go through the planes in verbal form, and then we're going to look at some pictures. We'll see a diagram, a video, and it should be fairly straightforward. So body planes, the three most common are known as the sagittal plane, okay, the coronal plane, and the transverse plane. Okay. Sections. Okay, so usually the sections are going to be named after the planes. So let's go ahead and learn the planes, and then we'll look at the rest of the material. All right, so you can see this woman here. This first plane is called the sagittal plane, and the sagittal plane divides the body into a right and left side. So if you see this, it's kind of like a piece of glass, and it's basically like if we were to cut this person in half, which of course we wouldn't, but if we were to cut this person in this direction, we would get a left and right side that are actually mirror images of one another. That is the sagittal plane. Okay. Now, a mid-sagittal plane is perfectly at the midline. So this is a perfect mid-sagittal cut. Okay, and then therefore, if it's a little off center, meaning it's not directly on the midline, it's called a parasagittal plane. The frontal, so if we were to cut this way, okay, cut down this way, where you have, we're cutting in the coronal frontal plane, you would get a front and back, right? It would divide the body into an anterior and posterior section. That is a coronal section. So we dissect things like when we're doing a dissection and we say this is the coronal plane or the coronal view or a coronal cut. That is what we mean. We mean we cut it this way, and you will see a coronal cut with organs and things like that. Okay, transverse. Transverse is pretty straightforward. So transverse means side to side or divided across. It's a cross section, right? Okay, that's what transverse is. Pretty easy. Now, oblique. Oblique is diagonal. So I'm going to connect. Well, that's not the best way to do it. Okay, I'll put that there, and I'm going to label this. Okay, this cut is the oblique. Actually, I don't like that. All right, the oblique section. Okay, there it is, right there. It is a cut at an angle, this angle. Okay, so transverse is straight, a horizontal cut. Oblique is a cut on a vertical plane at an angle, at an angle other than a 90-degree angle. Okay, great. So here's a great picture for you to see all of it together. The frontal plane, the mid-sagittal plane, the transverse plane, and then of course we have some extra information in here like superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, distal, proximal. And then the oblique is not in here, but I can add it in, and oblique is always going to be at an angle. Alrighty, very good. Now we're going to watch a quick video on these planes. They do a great job of showing you a full 3D animation of the planes. Okay, so hang tight.
Studying the human anatomy requires an understanding of the anatomical planes. These planes are used to describe the location of structures and the types of cuts that are made to view structures. A plane can be described as a 2D slice in a 3D space. Imagine a sheet of glass slicing across an upright human body in X, Y, and Z axis. This is what we refer to as anatomical planes. It helps us to describe or localize a structure in the body. Medical imaging modalities such as computed tomography or magnetic resonance often use these terms to describe the scans taken in flat slices. There are three cardinal anatomical planes. The mid-sagittal or median plane is a vertical plane that divides the body symmetrically into right and left parts. The coronal or frontal plane is also a vertical plane, but divides the body into front and back parts. The transverse plane is a horizontal plane that divides the body into top and bottom parts. You can learn more about these terminologies through our published lectures and screens.
Next thing we're going to talk about are the body cavities. So your human body is strategically and very carefully organized. That means that nothing here is accidental or, in other words, disorganized or random. Everything is strategically organized, and your organs are strategically placed inside of cavities. that are lined with membranes as well. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the two cavities. Okay, first cavity, get this pen out. Okay, the ventral cavity. Okay, and then we have the dorsal cavity. So remember when we talked about ventral, what did ventral mean? Okay, ventral meant the front and dorsal means the back. So this is a great example of utilizing that terminology that we just learned. So let's take a look at the ventral cavity. I'm going to zoom in on it. The ventral cavity is in red. So what do we have here? We have quite a bit. Okay, first we have the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity is, there's two views, lateral, that's a side view, anterior, that's the front view. What's inside of the thoracic cavity is pretty significant. Number one, you have your pleural cavities, okay? The pleural cavity, there's one right here and one right here. Guess what that houses? Right and left lung. Super easy, right? And then you have a paracardial cavity. Cardial, that's good, in reference to the heart, and that is where the heart sits. Okay, so everything is strategically placed in these perfect cavities that are lined with a membrane and encased. Therefore, your heart is not just bouncing around, neither are your lungs. They are placed in their cavities, and notice that they don't touch each other because they're in their specific cavities and lined with a membrane. Okay, now, this is pretty significant. Underneath that thoracic cavity, you have a muscle. It's this little thin sheet called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is right here, and the diaphragm divides the thoracic and abdominal cavity. Right there. All right. The abdominal cavity is clearly right here. It holds your digestive organs. And then right underneath is the pelvic cavity, and it's going to hold your urinary bladder, reproductive organs, and the lower part of the digestive cavity, which would be the rectum. Okay, easy. So your ventral cavity has subcavities, right? Thoracic, abdominal, pelvic. And then the thoracic cavity has subcavities as well. The pleural cavity, the pericardial cavity. Okay, the dorsal cavity. Remember the dorsal fin on the shark? Let's draw a little shark fin just for fun, okay? So, there we go. The dorsal's in yellow. What's inside of this cavity is very straightforward. Cranial, vertebral cavity. The cranial, what do you think that holds? Of course, it holds the cranium, the brain, right? And then the vertebral cavity, of course, that's going to hold the spinal cord. And that's a somewhat of a terrible sketch, but I suppose the point is that we know where the cavities are. Okay, let's recap that really quickly here. Okay, we have two major cavities, ventral, dorsal. Inside of the ventral cavity, we have the thoracic and abdominal cavity, which is separated by the diaphragm. Inside of the thoracic cavity, we have two pleural cavities that hold the lungs and one pericardial cavity that holds the heart. Now, dorsal, we have the cranial, which holds the brain, vertebral canal, which holds the spinal cord. Not too shabby, not too difficult either. So if we look closely, these cavities are incredibly significant. Ultimately, all we're showing you here is kind of repeat information, but I want you to understand a couple of things here. Pleura. Pleura is in reference to lung. Anytime you see plural, like this, pleural cavities, pleura, that means lung, and I want you to think lung immediately. When you see pericardium or cardiole, think heart. Okay. Peritoneum is in reference to the abdominal cavity. Okay, now there's different types of membranes, and the one that we're going to learn here today is called the serous membrane. So it's really not a hard concept to understand. It's just simply this. Your heart, for example, is encased in this very specialized membrane. It's a double membrane. So it would be like, here's our heart, of course. Okay, it's in its it's in the pericardium. But notice this. Let's look closely here. So this is the pericardium. There's space called the pericardial space that has serous fluid. And then it has the visceral pericardium that's actually touching the heart. So notice this one is touching the heart. This is this space with fluid, and this is touching the cavity. All right, and so the example that's utilized pretty often actually is like taking your fist and putting it into a balloon. So the part of the balloon that wraps right around your fist is comparable to the visceral serosa, or the visceral cavity, right? The air is comparable to this the serous cavity, and the outer is comparable to the parietal cavity. Very, very straightforward. Okay, so you want to review this material. I recommend doing the questions at the end of the chapter, and definitely make sure to review your material and do the questions at the end, do the section questions, make sure you understand each concept, and that's the end of chapter 1. Okay, I'll see you guys next time in chapter 2. Good luck.